Hey, welcome back to a new installment of the Wide Right Podcast. I'm Manny Navarro, Miami Hurricanes beat writer for The Athletic, joined by Carlos Ledo of the MIA All Day Pod. It's Tuesday, June 11th, right around 1:30 p.m. Carlos, it's been a minute since you and I have done a podcast, and I just asked you, actually, I just told you, I said, there's a lot to get to, and you said, what the hell's happened?
Yeah, I'm like, come on, man. It's summertime. The school's over. Kids are out of school. Summer camp's on. The sunshine is normally out. Today is a really rainy, ugly day, but it's been
Mhm.
fantastic weather out. So, sun's out, buns out, my man. The Canes are like not at the forefront of my mind right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, it really not a lot has not happened in terms of the roster or the field or anything like that because basically since the spring transfer portal window came to a close, they've been focused on recruiting, right? And they've only got 7 commitments in the class right now. They're doing a lot of official visits, things of that nature. So, I've put a less emphasis myself on recruiting just because I feel like the transfer portal and players, being gone after 1 or 2 years is such a big deal. Now that you have so much roster turnover constantly. I mean, I've spent basically the last month, Carlos, as you know, because I shared the document with you, breaking down ACC rosters, and I went through and I looked at ACC player retention and the percentages just for the 2020 recruiting class, 2021, 2022, 23, basically the classes, the recruiting classes that would make up the roster, and the average player retention in the ACC. This is league wide, Carlos, for a 4-year window that I just read, 2020 through 2023. Do you know what it is?
70%.
51%.
Wow.
51.5% of the high school recruits in the ACC are still with the schools they signed with from 2020 to 2023.
That's a
That's
shocking number.
Yes, if you do it from 22 and 23, meaning just the two previous classes, it's 72%. And if you do 21 to 23, it's 61.3%. But there are some teams that are really on the bottom of the barrel, Carlos, in terms of retaining players. Louisville, for instance, they've kept 33% of their recruits from
Yeah.
the last 4 years. That's it, just 33%.
I think that's a factor of a new head coach coming in and starting to clean house and turn the roster over.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, you have Boston College, who's kept 70% of their recruits are still on their roster from 2020 to 2023. Clemson is next with
A lot of good that's
66%.
done, Boston College.
Yeah. Well, the point is, we can get caught up in summer recruiting in June, 6 months before they sign, or we can give you the facts and talk to you about how much college football has changed instead of just talking about some high school kid from Georgia or Alabama that's going to commit to Miami, and will he commit all the way through and stay and actually sign the document come December. I honestly don't want to waste my time doing that for you guys because I feel like it's just not as important as it used to be. Roster turnover is just ridiculous. I went to
Yep.
Legends Camp this past Sunday, Carlos, down in Coral Gables.
Did they
Talked
ask
to
you to suit up?
No, they did not. But one of the things that I talked about with a couple of the people on Miami staff was that, how much even the camps have changed, right? Like these kids are coming in now, Carlos, and the only ones that are going to Legends Camp anymore are like ninth and 10th graders. The 11th graders, the 12th, they don't bother. There's really no reason for them to go anymore because they've already got offers by the time they're starting their junior year. And so the best kids, if they go to a camp, it's because they really like that coach and they have a great relationship, or they're taking an official visit that weekend. So the evaluation process is becoming earlier and earlier. All the changes in the NCAA rules makes it really, really hard. You're looking at basically 14, 15, and 16-year-olds and determining, should we offer them a scholarship right now, even before they start their junior year? And it's crazy. So I think that leads to a lot of problems down the road, misevaluations, players decommitting, all that stuff that Miami's dealt with in the past. But that was something that a few of the staffers were complaining to me about. They said, "Listen, it's just the NCAA calendar's kind of gotten ridiculous. The number of transfers, everything that goes on with that, is kind of crazy."
Well, the other thing I'm sure they talked to you about and they were complaining about is your fandom of Florida State. So I'm surprised they allowed you at Legends Camp. Did you walk in with the Florida State hat or
I,
no?
I left the Florida State hat in the car.
Okay.
I brought it. I brought it I brought it with me to Raz Mario. If I happened to run into him, I was gonna go back
Listen,
to the car and bring it out. But he was
I
not there when I was there.
I don't think that was gonna go well. I think Mario, being the MMA guy he is, he sees all these fights coming up. He's probably training himself, getting hyped up for these summer fights, and
Right,
that would
right.
not have gone well.
Well, I talked to the OG, the original Cristobal brother who was great at beating people's butts up. Lou Cristobal. I spent a lot of time hanging out with Lou on Sunday and some great stories about Mario back in the day, the physicality, just what it was like to grow up in that Cristobal family. So you're right. I would have been fearing for my life had pissed Mario off wearing an FSU hat. I would have never done something that disrespectful, Carlos.
Yeah, as you say that with a smirk. Okay.
Well, listen, the Canes did pick up a commitment. I'm not going to ignore that before we get to our main subjects here. Timothy Merritt, 3-star defensive back out of Birmingham, Alabama. He's actually a high star. He's ranked number 451 in the 247 Sports Composite. Usually the top 425 are blue chippers, so he's just outside of that range. The best thing about this kid, Carlos, and I know the thing coaches are excited about, he's 6'2", 180. He's long, lanky, can play safety, can play cornerback. I think they're going to let him play cornerback when he walks in. But I think ultimately he's probably projected more as a safety down the road. Either way, you want defensive backs that are big and long.
Yeah. Yeah, big and long and strong. And I think for those of you that are interested in clips, getting a little quick breakdown, our friend Jeremy Marcus Peltz did a pretty good breakdown. He shared it with us. So if you guys want to find him on Twitter, it's JMP 1063. He did a good little breakdown on the recruit.
Yeah, I'll say this. I think Miami, for the most part, is doing a good job. They're bringing in a lot of big-time kids like they're supposed to. But I've said this on the Big O show every time I've made an appearance the last couple weeks. I'm less worried about commitments right now as much as Miami season and how well they do. This is year 3 for
Yeah.
Mario. And like to me, the recruits at this point, what are they going to do? They're going to look at the results. Hey, the whole team is basically yours now, brother. Like you've had time to build this. The excuses of, hey, these weren't my players is out the window. So I think a lot of the guys that Miami's in the fight for are going to watch how the season goes. And if they play well, then I think Miami's going to have a really good recruiting class, potentially another top 10 recruiting class. I think if they don't play well, then you're probably on the outside looking in, just outside of that. Look, money's
And I
always
think not only that, but kids are going to start jumping ship too.
right. Right. Yeah. You're going to some of the younger guys on the roster, if they're not playing, if they're not getting the opportunity. But look, it's the way it is in college football now. It's just the way it is. Like I started this episode talking about, a lot of players now don't wait around. In fact, when I did my research in the ACC, a good amount of the guys that have jumped in the transfer portal were 2023 recruits, Carlos. Guys that had just signed. In fact, I'm looking at it right now from the 2023 class. 61 guys in the ACC from the 2023 class have already left the school they signed with. 61 out of 341 players that signed in the ACC, and I included Stanford and SMU and Cal into that mix as well. But it's the way things are now. Guys are not waiting around, and if your team struggles or they're not happy about playing time or they're not happy with NIL, they're going to leave. And so it's just part of the roster turnover that goes on nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more importantly for Mario, like you said, we said this last show. These are his ingredients now. If the meal tastes like shit, it's his fault. There's no more blaming anybody else. You're the chef. You're the guy that's bought the groceries. You brought them in. You've created this roster. You established the culture. You selected the offensive and defensive systems, and this is what we're going with. And I think even more importantly is based on your research. On paper, this might be the most talented team in the ACC, or at least one of the top 2. So if they aren't in the ACC title game, or at least competing for the championship, if they aren't a 10-win team or a 9-win team at least, and showing some sort of movement forward in terms of their progress on the field, then at that point it's okay, what else do you need, man? You've got everything you asked for. You've got a quarterback who's potentially a first-round pick. You've rebuilt the offensive line. Yes, the defensive backs are a little shaky, but defensively, this is probably going to be on both sides of the ball, I think a roster that's more complete than you've had here at Miami in a long time. If nothing happens here, if there's no big break or movement forward, then you're going to look at Mario and say, are you the guy? What else can you do? Yeah, you're a great recruiter, but if you're not producing on the field, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and I think in-game decisions is going to be huge for Mario, right? It's like, do you take timeouts when you're supposed to? Do you make the right decisions running out the clock late in games? Those are all things that I think he's going to ultimately be judged by this coming season. Do you beat the teams that you're supposed to beat? And do you play the toughest teams on your schedule the smart way without making dumb mistakes. I think all of that is going to weigh heavily on Mario this year and ultimately shape, I think, his tenure at Miami. Look, he's got a 10-year contract. I'm not saying they're anywhere near close to firing him if they go 8-4 next year. Carlos, that's not going to happen. But I certainly think you're right. I think what happens in general in college football is once you lose the fan base and the support, and maybe some of those NIL dollars, and you lose people believing in you, then that bleeds into everything else: recruiting, transfers, players just sort of being affected by it all. So you need to keep the positive momentum going. I think they will, Carlos. I've got faith in this team. I did the state rankings for the Athletic last week. We'll get to that in a few minutes. I think they're a top 2 team in the state. I'm not ready to put them past the Florida State Seminoles, Carlos, because and this is my reason. It has nothing to
Shocking.
do with this has nothing to do with my fandom, as some of you like to believe. This has to do with Mike Norvell being a better coach right now and getting more out of his teams in year 4 than Mario has in his first 2 years. And that's just facts. I'm not saying Mario can't graduate to the next level and do exactly what Norvell did, which is go 10-3 in his second season and then really be a playoff team in year 4. I'm not saying Mario can't do that. I'm just saying, to this point, if you were to ask me who's doing the better job coaching, Carlos, could you honestly make the point that Norvell is worse than Cristobal right now?
No. And I think if you had to choose which of the two would produce a game plan to keep them in a game or overcome an opponent who is more talented than they are, or maybe a better opponent on paper, you would probably choose Norvell. And that's my concern with Mario. My concern with Mario going into the season, the Hurricanes in general, is if they are in the lead in a game, if they're front running, I could see this team winning pretty much every game they're front running in, because they'll just shut it down. They'll run the football. They'll protect the ball. They'll hammer people down. They'll kill clock, and they'll win. They can win games that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's Mario's style: to get ahead, get a lead in a game, and then put you inside of a phone booth and beat the shit out of you until the clock runs out.
Right.
And that works. We saw that against Clemson. However, if it's a situation where this team has to come from behind in the second half, that concerns me. If there's a team that's a lesser opponent that comes up with a good game plan, comes up with a few turnovers and a couple quick scores, you're down 14 heading into the fourth quarter. You're down 10 heading into the fourth quarter. Do you believe this team has what it takes to come back? And is it going to be allowed to have the sort of system offensively to come back in that kind of a situation, which we haven't seen yet? That to
Mm-hmm.
me is the main concern. I mean, with the talent on this roster, they absolutely can. But a lot of it is not just talent. It's game plan. It's how you come into a game. It's how these guys are basically directed into executing what they're supposed to do on the field. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I spent some time in Tampa on Friday, went up to the OT7 national championships. My buddies at the South Florida Express, who I gotten to know pretty well. Everybody's who follows recruiting is like, oh my God, those are the Ohio State guys. They send Jeremiah Smith to Ohio State, and none of their star receivers go to Miami. Yes, I understand that. It's been mostly an Ohio State bleed from the South Florida Express. But kudos to those guys. They won the national championship for the second time in 3 years. Brett Getz and all those guys do a great job with building their rosters every single year. A couple of their guys are actually here right now, Carlos, on official visits. Jamie French and Vernell Brown, 2 guys that are top 50 recruits. Jamie's a 5-star. Vernell is a 4-star. They're in-state guys. French goes to Jacksonville Mandarin. Brown goes to Orlando Jones. Look, if you're going to win the battle eventually and get these elite recruits to stay here, you got to win big. I think that's what matters to a lot of these guys. I will say I spoke to Jamie French. I wrote about him in my story for today for The Athletic, kind of a post OT7 story looking at his recruiting. He told me he loves Kevin Beard, Carlos. He really does. And I think the one thing I got to give Mario credit for being around people at OT7 is I think he has a really, really good staff in terms of elite recruiters. I think Kevin Beard is one of the best in college football. If you read the 247s and the on threes, everybody is sort of singing his praises lately. I think another guy who's extremely underrated or maybe not talked about enough is on the defensive side, and that's Derek Nicholson, the linebackers coach. I hear nothing but glowing reviews about Derek Nicholson. So I think Mario, as he's kind of worked himself into year 3 here, I think he's hired some really good assistants that are better at recruiting than maybe the first staff that he brought in. And so I think that's going to help Miami maybe survive a bad loss or survive, some struggles or whatever. I
Yeah.
think that those guys will help them win some key recruiting battles down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it starts. Then once you got the talent on the roster, it's about developing and executing. So let's see if they could do that. And I think there's still, as good a job as Kevin Beard has done, I think there's still room for improvement there at the receiver room. I think for me, Luke Nichols, the first real big time quarterback that I've seen them recruit. I like him a lot. I love, a lot of people like, not Judd Nelson. What's his name? Judd,
Yes, the receiver, the quarterback that they signed last
right.
cycle. Yes, Judd Anderson, is it?
Judd Anderson. There we go. I
Yeah.
mean, not a big fan of his. Um, so hopefully we see that the momentum continue to build as they continue to produce on the field. If they produce on the field, I think more and more guys will end up considering Miami and listening to those pitches a little bit more. I think, right now, yes, they're landing a lot of big time recruits, but I think it could be even better once they start winning on the field because a lot of people are still hesitant. They're still looking at places like Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama because they know they're going to win and produce NFL first round picks. We have yet to see that here with Miami. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. I will say Luke Nichols done a good job recruiting for Miami because the guys that I talked to that play receiver all mention him and say that he's been reaching out to them. So he's committed. He's one of the 7 commits and he's doing his job helping Miami, even though schools are still after him. I think Florida State and South Carolina are still sort of recruiting him behind the scenes to try to get him to flip. I think he's pretty much committed to Miami and I think he's doing a good job recruiting for them. One little storyline, and we're going to get to mailbag questions. We're going to get to my ACC preseason rankings, which is basically the crux of today's show. But one little thing that I came away with from going to Miami's Legend Camp over the weekend, this whole Simeon Barrow story, the defensive lineman that they got out of Michigan State, I kind of was digging around, asking some questions about it. Carlos, I know it was kind of a big deal to some Miami fans because this is a guy who's a 30-game starter, a run stuffer that came in from Michigan State.
Desperately needed.
Desperately needed, right? Especially after Jared Harrison Hunt left for SMU. Um, they're working through the kinks right now, Carlos. I think basically what happened was, and this was sort of an odd wrinkle to it all. I think his paperwork was still in the transfer portal, even though he had already signed and started taking classes at Miami. For whatever reason, he still showed up in the computer, and he was getting SEC schools were reaching out to him, trying to see if they could get him to basically renege and transfer to their programs. Instead, the kid decided to walk away from practice or the workouts that they were doing in the off season. Looked like he went home to Georgia. Looked like he was going to take off, from what I understand, and then realized, hey, I can't. I've already started classes. I've already started receiving financial aid. And I think Miami is working with him. From what I understand, he's put a good foot forward, is the way it was described to me. He's been back working out with his teammates, back on campus, doing what he's supposed to do. But it's one of those things that happens. I'm going to tell you, Carlos, this happens quite a bit, and people just never hear about it because players are unhappy either with playing time. They got into a fight with a coach. They want more NIL money. It's just the way it is. It's the new world of college football, but it's been happening for years, even before NIL. Where these sort of little sideshows with players and coaches and staffs happen. So I'll just say this: I think Simeon Barrow is going to be a big part of Miami's defense this year. I expect him to be a starter. I expect him to be a guy who contributes and plays a whole lot of snaps. Is he going to be dominant? I don't know. He wasn't described to me as somebody who is a Warren Sapp, Vince Wilfork dominant big man, but certainly a big body that they need and somebody that will be a part of this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at this point, because of the lack of depth there at defensive tackle and size, particularly, I think anything you can get is a big help. Just the only concern is now, how do you trust this guy, right? Do you fully trust him as a coaching staff? Do his teammates trust this guy now? Because he up and left as soon as he started getting some additional offers from elsewhere. And the only reason he's there is because he couldn't leave. So we'll see.
Yeah,
he's got no choice but to produce, because if he doesn't, then if he doesn't want to leave, if he wants to leave again, he's going to have to put up numbers or else he's going to get 0 offers.
All right. We're going to get to the pod mailbag questions in a minute. You guys sent in a lot of stuff, good topics that we'll talk about for sure. But I wanted to go with my ACC preseason rankings. I know it's June 11th. I know we've yet to see what happened with injuries and camp and all that kind of stuff. But right now, on paper, based on the post-spring transfer portal, my analysis, my deep, I want to say about 50 pages worth of analysis on the conference, Carlos. I mean, I broke everything down. I counted the number of blue chippers on the roster. I counted the number of career combined starts, transfers, player retention, I mean, there's all kinds of data and stuff here in my charts that I can show you if you're interested in diving that deep. But I broke down literally every single roster in the league, looked at the recruiting classes, looked at what was added up. And so I came up with these sort of preseason rankings, and I just wanted to go through them here with the listening audience.
Thank
You cool with
God,
that?
thank God you do stuff like this, because there will be no way in hell I would put this kind of effort into anything.
All right, so I'm gonna start from the bottom. I'm gonna count backwards from 17 to 1 as we get to preview the my basically my thought process of how I would rank the teams in the ACC. You can agree or disagree. You can tell me, Manny, you're crazy. I think that's too low, or I think that's too high. I want your input as we go through this, okay? But the first sort of 6 to 7, I'm just gonna breeze through, especially the ones that I don't think are going to have winning records here, which is basically 5 teams that I've kind of put on sub 500 watch. Okay. 17, Wake Forest, coming
Okay.
off a 4-win season. They had lost a lot to the transfer portal. Yes, they brought in Hank Bachmeier, the former Louisiana Tech quarterback, a guy who has a whole bunch of starts, Carlos. Their over-under for wins is 4.5. I'm taking 4 wins for Virginia Tech. As good as their coaching staff is and as good a job as they do, it's just hard to win there, man. And especially in today's NIL era, they didn't pull in a bunch of guys. And they got 5 transfers brought in. The guys are from Louisiana Tech, Indiana State, Georgetown, Southern Illinois, and Kent State. Yes, they've played elsewhere, but they've played at a lower level. It's just hard to win when you do that.
Yeah. Didn't Bachmeier also play at Boise State?
He did as well, yes. And
Yeah.
he's an experienced quarterback, but
He is. He's a good quarterback.
to me, he's not even top 10 in the league. I did my top 10
No.
quarterback rankings. I don't even have him in the top 10. So I just think it's another sort of struggling season for Dave Clawson. He lost some receivers that were really good, guys that were contributors for him. Offensive line doesn't bring back a lot. And Miami plays Wake Forest this year. So that's, I think they're certainly, I don't know if they're number 17. I ranked them 17 right now, but I think they're definitely bottom 5 in the league. All right. Number 16, Pittsburgh. Really rough year for Pittsburgh last year. 2 years removed from winning the ACC championship. Pat Narduzzi lost some guys to the transfer portal, Carlos, that were pretty good players on his defense. The defense has sort of been Pittsburgh's calling card. I looked these numbers up. When they won the ACC championship 2 years ago, Carlos, they averaged 41.5 points. Do you know how many points they averaged last season with a different quarterback and a new coordinator?
24.
21. 21 points a
Ooh.
game. You go back 20 points. All of a sudden, you go from ACC championship to bottom of the barrel. And I don't know that they're going to take a huge leap. They did bring in Eli Holstein, who's one of the top quarterbacks in the 2023 recruiting class. He signed with Alabama, transferred over to Pitt. He's still competing for the starting job with Nate Yarnell. Pitt is just not a good team right now. They've got some guys at receiver that are productive. But overall, just not a very, very good team. In fact, I think Kerwin Bell's son is the new offensive coordinator over there.
Oh,
Remember
wow.
Kerwin Bell, who played for the
Yeah.
Gators? 31-year-old guy, comes over from Western Carolina. Smart kid. But it's hard to win in the ACC without overwhelming talent. And like I said, they lost guys to the portal. They lost 3 starters on their defense: Dayon Hayes, Samuel Okunlola, and their linebacker Solomon DeShields, who all left to Hayes and Okunlola went to Colorado, and DeShields went to Texas A&M. He was their 3rd leading tackler last season. So just, Bengali Kamara, another linebacker, went to South Carolina. They lost a bunch of dudes that were decent contributors. So to me, bad year last year. I think they'll get better on offense, which should make their overall record better, but I still think they're a bottom 5 team in the league.
Okay.
All right, Virginia. This is, you think about the Cavaliers. They came in here and they gave Miami a hell of a game last year. Do you remember how nervous were you watching that Virginia game last year?
Come on, man. This is at this point. Every time they get into ACC play, I'm nervous watching every game.
Tony Elliott actually had a pretty good season in the portal. Basically bringing in some guys that are contributors. They didn't lose a whole lot in terms of like actual contributors, guys that were a part of their team last year, but still, there's a talent gap, man. Like, it's just, they're not very talented team. They went 3-9 last year. I don't like their quarterback room. I just think that it's going to be a struggle for Virginia to win. They could maybe win 4 or 5 games, but they're not going to do much more than that. I still don't think they're a bowl team, even with some of the pickups. They brought Chris Tyree from Notre Dame over. He was the leading receiver for the Irish. They picked up a couple guys on defense that were starters elsewhere, including Dorian Jones, who was a starter for Cincinnati last year. But again, it's not overwhelming improvement, and I still don't think their quarterback room is any better. So I've got Virginia 15th. Number 14, Carlos, the Duke Blue Devils and Manny Diaz.
Oh, disrespectful to your boy Manny Diaz, bro.
Yeah, I'm hurting Manny. Their over under for wins, by the way, is 5.5. I'm picking them to go 4 and 8. Here's the reason why, Carlos. Duke was basically liquidated of talent. Okay, they lost. They were a pretty good team last year. And I think won seven or 8 games last year with that staff. But they lost their quarterback. Riley Leonard went to Notre Dame. They lost their leading rusher, Jordan Waters. He went to NC State. They lost a whole bunch of starting offensive linemen. They lost Aeneas Peebles, who was a third-team All-ACC defensive lineman. He went over to Virginia Tech. They lost their top edge rusher to Notre Dame, RJ Oben. They lost their third leading tackler at linebacker, Dorian Mousey, to Auburn. And they lost their top cornerback, Brandon Johnson, who would have been their top returning DB. Look, they went out, they got Malik Murphy from Texas, who was a talented quarterback, but he didn't even play that well in the spring. So I think Manny Diaz is going to do okay. They went out, they got the left tackle from UCLA, the starting left tackle from UCLA, Bruno Fina. And they brought in a lot of guys from like the FCS Ivy League level who are smart guys, right? Those guys can definitely, they'll be a smart team, but it's hard to win, Carlos, when you lose as much as Duke did through the portal. And so I just think it's going to be a struggle for them. And really what I'm saying, Carlos, it's no excuse for Miami to lose to Manny Diaz and Duke at home when they meet.
Oh God. If you could create a worst case scenario, if you would create Mario's FIU, that would be it. Losing to Duke at home with Manny Diaz as the head coach a year after this team suffered major losses in the transfer portal in terms of their talent level, that would be rough.
Now, look, I will say this about Duke. They have some decent receivers. Like Jordan Moore is back. He was a second-team All-ACC guy.
Talented quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they have a kid that can make plays, but you look at that offensive line, right? And you see, and I'm going to read this to you: Penn transfer, Lafayette transfer, Holy Cross transfer, Cornell transfer, Northwestern transfer, and Stanford transfer. Like those are the guys that they've got on the offensive line. They basically had to redo the whole unit.
But you know what you just told me? There's a bunch of smart guys on that offensive line.
That's basically it. Yes, and their defensive line, like I said, they lost some good players on that defense. I don't expect a lot from Duke this year. All right, 13th, I have Stanford, 3.5 wins in the over/under. Troy Taylor's a good coach. I think he's doing a good job recruiting, believe it or not, Carlos. They're in it for like some 5-star offensive tackles. But Stanford is they've just been struggling now for several years. I think they're the kind of program that could recruit decent players. They're going to sign some good high school players. But like Clemson, they don't sign a lot of guys out of the portal. In fact, their transfer portal class, as I look at it right now, I think it's 4 guys that they picked up in the transfer portal. So they're relying a lot on high school kids to come in and contribute. They got a defensive lineman out of Yale, and they got a linebacker out of Northern Iowa. Those were their big pickups. Nobody else, the other 2 guys have never started in college. And meanwhile, they lose a starting edge rusher. They lose a tight end, and Ben Yurashek to Georgia, a guy who has 29 starts. He transfers to Georgia. They lost one of their top safeties to Utah. It's just hard to win like that. They were 3-9 last year. They've got some decent young players. Cedric Irvin, by the way, is going to be their star running back. Cedric Irvin of Cedric Irvin Jr., I should say, not Cedric Irvin the father, who I just saw at the OT7. But again, this is a young team. A lot of guys that have yet to really play football. It's a second year of a turnaround. So I think Stanford, I would put them a notch above Duke because I think there's more talent on their team than Duke, Virginia, Pittsburgh, and Wake Forest. And I like Troy Taylor, but I don't think they're ready to be over 500. Okay?
No.
All right. You ready for the top 12 in the ACC?
Let's see.
Number 12, North Carolina.
Ooh, big dip from Mac Brown.
Yes, their over/under for wins is 7.5, which is better than some of the teams I listed ahead of them. But Let's look at the numbers, Carlos. Mac Brown has had 2 NFL draft picks playing quarterback for him the last 5 years in Sam Howell and Drake May. He went 7-6, 8-4, 6-7, 9-5, and 8-5. And now he's got Max Johnson, a guy who played at LSU and Texas A&M, as his quarterback, a badly depleted offensive line blocking for him. Now, look, Omarion Hampton is back at running back. He was the leading rusher in the ACC. But it's hard to envision North Carolina averaging 35 points a game like they have for the last 3 years, with as much of sort of the turnover and the drop in elite quarterback play to me, which means they have to be better on defense. They have not been very good on defense with Mac Brown as coach. They gave up 36.6 points per game to 7 FBS teams they faced last year who had winning records. If you're giving up nearly 40 points a game to teams with a pulse, you're probably a 500 team at best, and that's with really good quarterback play. So to me, that's why I've got North Carolina 12. Any complaints or thoughts about that?
Nope, I agree. Just the only good thing that Mac Brown has done or consistently done there in North Carolina is beat the Hurricanes.
Yeah, he has, and thankfully Miami doesn't have him on the schedule this year.
Yep. Thank God. Fingers crossed that doesn't bite us in the ass later.
All right, number 11, I listed Boston College. They have 4.5 wins for the over/under. I have them going 6-6 this season. Bill O'Brien is their new coach, Carlos. He was hired to be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, but basically decided to come home to Boston, where he's from, to take over for Jeff Hafley. Jeff Hafley, of course, went to become the Green Bay Packers defensive coordinator. O'Brien's been around a long time. He went through the Nick Saban coaching rehab clinic at Alabama not too long ago, which means he's not out of touch with the way college football needs to be coached. BC did well in the portal this offseason, actually had them as one of the winners in the transfer portal. Thomas Castellanos, I thought, was a pretty good quarterback.
Yeah.
But to me, there's a ceiling for programs like BC. It's put in place by this company called lack of NIL. And I think that's ultimately what's going to hold BC back. Any thoughts on Bill O'Brien and Boston College?
I mean, initially people thought O'Brien was a really good offensive coordinator, but as time has gone on, he's been less and less innovative. And I think he showed that at Alabama. He had a lot of talent, didn't score as many points as they thought he should have scored. Went back to the NFL, came back to college football now. So I think, he's well respected. He's a hell of a coach. Did a really good job at Penn State while he was there. But we'll see. I don't know how much of a difference he's going to make there. I think they'll be slightly improved, but I don't think they'll be, light years ahead of where they were before.
No, I think they'll be 6-6, 7-5 at best. And I got
Boston. They'll be Boston College.
Yeah, yeah. Syracuse is a hot team. Everybody's excited because Fran Brown, who was the defensive backs coach at Georgia, like he's the new young, exciting coach. He's 42. He's from New Jersey.
Like Dino Babers was?
Yes. A lot of preseason hype over Syracuse. They've got the over/under for wins at 7.5. I got them going 7-5. Yes, they did well in the transfer portal. They picked up Kyle McCord, who was a starting quarterback at Ohio State, which means they should be better than they were a year ago when they only averaged 23.5 points per game. Oronde Gadsden, the tight end, is healthy. He will be back. They got Marlo Wax, who's one of the top linebackers in the ACC, Carlos, but it's still Syracuse. And while Miami ends the season November 30th at the Wireless Dome, as they call it up there.
It'll always be the Carrier Dome to me.
Yes, that's what they call it now. I still think this is a longer rebuild for Syracuse than, just flip the button. You bring in a couple guys from Texas A&M on the defensive line and a couple receivers from Georgia, and all of a sudden you're great. Like, that's just not going to happen to me. Kyle McCord was good, but he's not the best quarterback I've ever seen at Ohio State, not by a long shot. In fact, that's why he's not there anymore. So I think Syracuse will be better, but not a whole lot better than they were a year ago.
Yeah, I agree. 75 seems like the ceiling for them to me.
Not number 9 on my preseason list, California. Carlos.
Look at that. Got the Golden Bears up pretty high, huh?
Got the Golden Bears up pretty high. 5.5 wins over/under. I've got them going 7-5 this season. Justin Wilcox has been around a long time. He's got a losing record in his 7 years as head coach at Cal, 36-43. But he took the Bears to a bowl game last year for the first time since 2019. He has the 5th most experienced roster in the league in terms of college starts. Okay, so they've got a lot of experience back. Jaden Ott is one of the best running backs in the league. Ran for Pac-12 leading 1,300, 15 yards and 12 touchdowns last season. They upgraded their QB room. Yes, they lost their top receiver to Washington through the portal, but they brought in 4 guys. Utah, Notre Dame, Ohio State, New Mexico State's Jonathan Brady, a guy who was productive last year for New Mexico State. The issue for Cal ultimately is pass defense. They get shredded because they don't have a very good pass rush. They were 11th in the Pac-12 with only 1.85 sacks per game last year. And I think Miami is kind of in a good spot to beat them because they've got Cam Ward and a bunch of really good receivers, and I think that's kind of their kryptonite.
Yeah, and I think you're going to be facing probably bigger, stronger offensive linemen in the ACC than you did in the Pac-12. So I don't think it's going to bode very well for Cal's pass rush coming into the ACC. I think they'll probably be around 6-6.
Yeah, I got them 7-5. Their most proven pickups, by the way, are guys from UC Davis and Princeton through the portal on the defensive side. So that's why I still don't believe in them. Number 8, Carlos, SMU Mustangs.
Pretty low for SMU.
7.5 wins for this team. 7-5 is what I've got them finishing. Former Miami offensive coordinator Rhett Lashley led the Mustangs to their first 11-win season, Carlos, since 1982 last year in the American Athletic
Since
Conference.
the Eric Dickerson days.
Yes, they won the AAC. They finished 22nd in the AP poll. Look, they've got the 6th most experienced team on paper coming back from last season, and the 5th most talented team if you start counting up blue chippers, which I did. They've got 22 blue chippers, the same number as Louisville. But, Carlos, they are going into a Power 4 conference, and it's a different jump up when you go from Group of 5 to Power 4. Look at UCF last year in the Big 12. They competed. They were good, but they took their lumps because physically they couldn't take the pounding week in and week out. Preston Stone is a very good quarterback. SMU's receivers are pretty good. But when you start going down the roster, the best players at SMU for the most part are basically Miami castoffs. So I'm not ready to buy SMU yet. What do you say?
I think they played in a league that's a lot tougher than people realize. The AAC is a tough league. They've got a really their top end teams are a lot better than people think. I think they've got a lot of talent on that roster. They added more in the offseason. Yes, the best guys are Miami castoffs, but those Miami castoffs tend to produce elsewhere. Jalen Knighton's still a dangerous weapon for them. So they've got an explosive offense and a really good quarterback that's coming back in another year in the system. So to me, when you've got a veteran quarterback that's produced already, you've got a team coming off 11 wins. Do I think they'll be an 11-win team again? No, but I think this team can easily be 8-4.
Well, every team that I ranked ahead of SMU, Carlos, I think has a better quarterback than SMU does.
Okay.
And we'll start with number 7. That would be Georgia Tech, who has been a thorn in Miami's side quite often. We'll not forget about last year. Georgia Tech's over/under for wins is only 5.5. I got them going 7-5 and 5-3 in the ACC. Haynes King is a top 5 quarterback in the league in my mind, Carlos. He's got a lot of weapons around him on offense. 4 starting offensive linemen back from a team that finished 4th in the ACC last year with 31.1 points per game. Finished 3rd in the conference in yards per play, so they're explosive. The problem for Georgia Tech, and I wrote about this in my mailbag for The Athletic that's coming out tomorrow, you can't be 131st against the run and expect to be a top 25 team, which is why I've got them 7th, because I like what they've got on offense. Brent Key is a former offensive lineman. He wants to run the football. He wants to be explosive. He's got his leading rusher back from a year ago. But they need to upgrade the talent on the defensive line. They picked up Romello Height, which is a familiar name to Hurricanes fans. He's a guy who was committed to them, snubbed them, ended up at USC last year. He transfers into Georgia Tech, where he will be one of their top edge rushers. But you got to be better against the run. And when I broke down Georgia Tech's roster, this was kind of stunning to me. There's only three blue chippers on in their front 7 overall. One of them is Kevin Harris, an Alabama transfer. The other one is Height, and then a senior linebacker, Trinelius Tatum. Recruiting big men in the Southeast on defense should not be this hard for a program like Georgia Tech. And to me, people who always get excited about Georgia Tech, this is what I tell you: recruit better on the defensive line. Get some of those guys that are going to Georgia and Alabama, at least 1 or 2 of them every cycle, to come sign with you.
Easier said than done, especially when you're dealing with academic standards like they are at Georgia Tech. So that's the reason why you don't get as many of those guys. The other thing is, to me, I think because they're so bad on defense, especially against the run, I don't see them being set better than 75. To me, Haynes King and Preston Stone, to me, it's a toss-up as to who the better quarterback is. Haynes King's a little bit more athletic. I think Preston Stone's a better thrower, better passer. So I don't necessarily think that Haynes King's better than Preston Stone. I'd say they're even.
All right. Well, I definitely think this guy is better. The guy I have on my number 6 team, and that would be Virginia Tech, who their over under is 7.5 wins. I'm projecting them to go 8-4, finish 5-3 in the ACC. Brent Pry, their coach, is entering his 3rd season. He's got a top 5 quarterback in my mind, and Kyron Drones. And the most experienced pass catchers in the league. They got between receiver and tight end, 137 combined starts, Carlos. Yes, not as productive as Xavier Restrepo and Sam Brown and everybody that Miami has in their room in terms of 800-yard receivers, but um, still, from an experience standpoint, guys that produce, guys that share the ball, and they've got a really good tight end room in my mind, a better tight end room than Miami. So I wouldn't rank Virginia Tech in the preseason top 25 like my colleague at The Athletic did. Stuart Mandel had them number 25. They went 7-6 last year, and only 2 of those wins came against FBS teams who finished with winning records. But I also wouldn't be afraid to take the over/under, which is 7.5 wins, as I said, because their schedule's not extremely difficult. They got Rutgers coming to Lane Stadium. They've got Miami, a trip to Miami 6 days later. They got Georgia Tech at home. They've got Syracuse on the road November 2nd, and then Clemson at home November 9th, which to me, it's not a gauntlet of a schedule at all, right? I mean, they've got Vanderbilt on the road to open the season, Marshall. I think this is going to be a better Virginia Tech squad. I expect them to be competitive in the league, and if they can pull an upset at Miami on the road September 27th on 6 days rest for both teams, maybe they're a contender for the conference championship.
I don't know, man. Kyron Drones was a 58% passer last year. Very athletic. Didn't throw a lot of interceptions. Good touchdown interception ratio. 68.6 QBR. He's okay. I don't think he's better than the last 2 guys we were talking about.
All right. We'll agree to disagree.
He's an athletic guy. That's the one thing, and I don't know if he'll make it through the whole season. That's the other thing.
Number 5 on my list, NC State Wolfpack. They're over under for wins, 8.5. I've got them going 8-4 this year. Dave Doran, to me, Carlos, has proven himself to be a pretty darn good coach. They've won 8 or 9 games each of the past 4 seasons. And although they lost some really good players, including the defensive player of the year in Peyton Wilson at linebacker, they picked up a lot of offense through the transfer portal, including running back Jordan Waters from Duke, who I told you about. They signed Grayson McCall, who was at Coastal Carolina. He started 40 games for them at Coastal Carolina, was productive. I think was his conference's player of the year. They've got some receivers. They signed Zeke Correll, who was the starting center at Notre Dame. They've got a pretty good offensive line, so I expect them to be a lot better on offense. And I still think they're talented at linebacker and in the secondary. And so I think they're still going to win 8 games and be in the hunt for the ACC championship. You got a problem with NC State?
No, I think they're always well coached, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They're always going to play real good defense. They're always going to be one of the best defensive teams in the ACC. You know, the question becomes, can Grayson McCall make that transition from the lower league to the ACC and be effective? He's a smaller dude. Can he last an entire season? He got injured last year at Coastal Carolina. Can he last the entire season and throughout ACC play, playing against these bigger opponents? We'll see.
Yeah, they've got Tennessee at a neutral site game. They've got to play at Clemson. They've got Cal on the road. They've got to play at Georgia Tech. But it's not a gauntlet of a schedule overall. So I think the potential is there for them to rise up, especially if they improve a lot on offense and be a real contender. I've kind of got them as the dark horse pick to win the league this year. If you had to pick one surprise, that would be the team that I think is actually capable of winning the league this year. All right, number 4, Carlos. I've got Louisville. Louisville 8.5 win over under. I've got them finishing 8-4. Jeff Brom impressed the hell out of me last year, Carlos, winning 10 games in his first year. He made it to the ACC championship game. They've got the most experienced team in the league on paper, 717 combined college starts on this roster. But it kind of feels like Louisville kind of caught lightning in a bottle last year because they had that, some of the holdovers from the previous year, from the previous staff that were pretty good players, especially on defense. This year, they went out and they signed 27 more transfers, and I don't think they necessarily replenished their running back room. They had some really good players in the running back room: Jawar Jordan, Isaac Garendo, and then they
got one guy.
Yeah, they got Penny Boone. Well, yes, they got Don Cheney Jr., but Penny Boone was the big pickup for them. They got him in the winter. Well, guess what? Penny Boone, who was the MAC Offensive Player of the Year, decided, nah, I'm going to go to UCF. And so he left Louisville in the offseason for UCF to go join another 1,400-yard back in Gus Malzahn's offense. So I think that hurts them a little on offense. I'm also not convinced that Tyler Shaw, the Texas Tech transfer who played for Mario, is as good as Jack Plummer. So I think what they lost in the backfield is going to hurt them a little bit. But they do have the most experienced defensive line room, even more career starts than Miami does. They've got Aston Gelati, who was an all ACC defensive lineman, a guy who could potentially be the ACC defensive player of the year this year. So Louisville's going to be a tough game when Miami comes to visit. But I think on paper right now, I'd pick Miami to win.
I'd agree. But, the thing is, Jeff Brom, like you said, is a really good coach, and he's going to come up with an offensive game plan week in and week out that's going to cause problems for defenses, and it's going to keep them in games. And when you have a defense that's as experienced as they are, that's also going to help. Whenever you got a strong defensive line and can put pressure on the quarterback and stop the run, that's going to keep you in games. So I think that's a combination for them to be successful this year. I think they'll still be a very dangerous team. I think you're going to see the evolution of Brom's system in year 2. And that makes him a little bit more dangerous. Now, to me, can the quarterback keep up with the system? Is he the right guy? The garden snake is gone now, no longer out there tossing the rock like his daddy. We'll see what happens. But I do think the addition of Don Chaney Jr. showed the ability to be a big-time back. If he's healthy, I think he could help them a lot.
All right, number 3 on my list, Carlos, the Clemson Tigers.
Ooh.
The Clemson Tigers, 8.5 win over under. I got them going 9-3, 6-2 in the ACC. Look, on paper, Dabo Swinney still has the most talented team in the league in terms of recruiting rankings, right? In terms of blue chippers. He's got 51, including 1 at quarterback and former 5-star Cade Klubnik. But they're also, Carlos, to me, a couple injuries away from being a 500 program because his team is the least. I just told you Louisville had 717 combined starts. In terms of their roster, guys that have played in college, I'm going to give you the number for Clemson because it's the fewest. 254 combined starts. That's what happens when you don't use the transfer portal, Carlos. You're literally 400 starts behind the best team in the ACC in terms of that level of experience. So, look, can you survive? Can you win that way? Last year, Clemson didn't. They didn't do it last year. They went 8-4, if I'm not mistaken. I think they won 9 games with the bowl game. But they lost at Miami. They lost to Florida State. And they looked very, very beatable for all of the young talent that they had. And then, by the way, while you're not adding guys to the transfer portal, you're still losing them. Andrew Makuba, who was one of the top safeties in the league, went to Texas. They lost one of their top receivers, Bo Collins, to Notre Dame. So he's not keeping everybody, Carlos. And to me, Clemson is, without question, a controversial program because of the way Dabo Swinney is operating. What are your thoughts on the Tigers and the fact that I've got them number 3?
I don't disagree, and I think they still have a lot of issues like you talked about, especially with the youth. But I think one of the reasons, I think philosophically anyway, that Dabo doesn't like to use the transfer portal is he doesn't want to bring guys in that have bad habits already. He prefers to bring guys in, mold them to his system, create the culture from within, and have them grow within the Clemson culture and the Clemson system, and hand pick these guys in terms of who he wants. So to me, that's a reason why he doesn't do it. And it's easier to mold these guys than it is to like disassociate older guys from bad habits. And he knows what he's getting from a culture standpoint because he handpicked these young guys. The difference to me is when we talk about, talented teams and, not taking coaching into consideration, the big thing that's held Clemson back the last few years is their offensive system. Their offensive system, since they lost Tony Elliott and their other offensive coordinators, has been subpar. It has not been to the level that it was in the past. And you're seeing that as they continue to struggle and move forward. If they teams that are very talented can be held back by systems and coaching, and that's the example here is Clemson. So let's see if they open it up a little bit more offensively. Can Cade Klubnik be a more effective quarterback? Can they give him more to work with? Can they put him in a situation where he feels more comfortable operating the offense? That's going to be the key determining factor for them. And, Will Shipley gone. What are they going to do in the run game?
Well, Phil Moffitt is a really good running back. I'm not worried about their running game. I'm worried about their depth, Carlos. It's hard to throw freshmen and second-year guys into the fire if they're not physically ready for that. And I think most of the people who've been out and watched Clemson, some of the other guys I've talked to, Bud Elliott from On3 and Andrew Ivinson, they're all telling me like Clemson's offensive line, like people are worried about it, like how they're going to play this year.
Yep.
And if you look at how Miami beat them last year, how did they do it?
Physically.
At the
Yeah,
line
and
of
it's
scrimmage.
like we talked about. It's that grown ass man factor, right? When you have grown ass men on your team, that makes that talent gap, that deficiency in talent, it shrinks it and maybe sometimes overcomes it.
Yep. All right, Carlos, we're down to the final two. And I think you know which way I'm leaning with number two and which way I'm leaning with number one. Number two,
The Miami Hurricanes.
your Miami Hurricanes,
Yeah,
correct.
figured that one.
Not surprising, right? I'm the hater. I'm the guy who doesn't believe in them fully. I'm not going to predict for them to finish number one in the regular season, because I can't trust them, Carlos. As much as I want to trust the talent and the ability of Miami,
I'll give you an analogy. Let me give you an analogy. To
yes.
me, over the last 20 years, the Miami Hurricanes have been like Jenny from Forrest Gump. Right? Like Forrest, the minute he gives his heart up to Jenny, you think it's going to happen. They're finally going to get together. Jenny pulls some shit. She runs off with a Black Panther. She runs off to Woodstock. She runs off elsewhere. Then when she gets a debilitating disease that she's about to die from, then she comes back and says, "Hey, Forrest, I'm dying. Can you take care of me? And by the way, here's your son."
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
hopefully we don't get to the stage where Mario shows up pregnant and dying before we start winning.
Look, I've got Miami going 10-2, 6-2 in the ACC, Carlos. I got them losing at Louisville and on the road at Georgia Tech. I know
Oh, look at you.
I know that probably gets you upset, but I think for whatever reason, they have trouble with quarterbacks that are mobile. And I think if I were to have to pick an upset for Miami to screw things up, but still get into the ACC championship game, I would pick Haynes King to be the assassin, even though he did not look very good last year against Miami. I think
No.
Georgia Tech has the kind of team
Well, he looked good for
that
one
can be
series.
problematic. He did. He looked good when it mattered. So anyway, that's who I've got Miami. We've broken down the roster plenty for you guys. Cam Ward is going to make them a lot better. I believe in that. I think the offense is going to be really, really good. But again, can this team show up when they need to? Can they win games they're supposed to? I'm not ready to totally believe that's going to happen yet. Meanwhile, the team that I do have in first, Florida State, proved it last year. They went 13-0 before their team decided to take the Orange Bowl off, and they lost 63-3 to Georgia. But Florida State is still a very good program. Mike Norvell and his staff have been there now going into year 5. And I told you, Carlos, staff continuity means a lot to me. It's how Clemson won, right? You look at Dabo Swinney and what he built there. He had the same staff for a long time, and that's why Clemson became one of the best teams in the league. Now, the wrinkle here is Mike Norvell actually uses the transfer portal, and he uses it effectively. And while people can sit here and say Mario has out-recruited Mike Norvell, because he has, his signing classes have been ranked higher than Florida State's, I think you can say, well, Mike Norvell has also done a good job developing players that he inherited, like Jordan Travis, like other guys on that FSU roster, and then taken recruits that through the transfer portal that weren't necessarily great at the previous places and still turned them into very usable, winnable pieces. And that right now, Carlos, is why I have Florida State number one in the preseason preview. DJ Uyunglele is not as good a quarterback as Cam Ward. Cam Ward is going to be better than him this year. But DJ Uyunglele is still a top 5 quarterback in the ACC because of what he does with his legs and the fact that he is huge and really hard to bring down. And yes, Florida State
and he proved to be a better passer at Oregon State than they showed at Clemson.
He did. And he's not as good as passer as Ward is, and he struggled this spring throwing the football. And Florida State has questions at wide receiver, but they've got the most experienced offensive line in the league coming back in terms of combined starts. They've got guys in their front 7 that they picked up through the transfer portal that are good, including Marvin Jones Jr. from Georgia. Florida State has proven they have a track record of finding edge rushers from other schools and turning them into studs. I can't go against Florida State right now until proven otherwise. And the only games I have them losing right now, Carlos, are at Miami and at Notre Dame.
What a cop out, what a hedge, saying they're going to be better than Miami and then having them lose to Miami. That is the ultimate chef's kiss to you, my friend. What a move to appease the fan base.
Well, it's not even appeasing the fan base. It's really how I feel. Looking at their roster, they've got Clemson, looking at their schedule rather. They've got Clemson at home. They've got Georgia Tech in Ireland. They've got Boston College at home. They've got Cal at home. Their only road games really are at SMU and Miami. I mean, and Notre Dame. And I think, the Irish at home, that's kind of a tough game. They've got Florida at home, Charleston Southern at home, North Carolina at home, Duke on the road. Duke, I told you, was not good. So I just don't see many losses for this team, which is why I think it'll be them and Miami in the ACC championship game.
Yeah, I think we're going to see just how good Florida State is. They're going to be tested a little bit against, I think, against Memphis. Memphis is always good. They've always got a good offense, and I think they're going to be tested against SMU. Once they get past that SMU Clemson stretch, then we'll see how good they are.
All right. That was our ACC preview, Carlos. We've already been talking for an hour, so we're going to try to get through the mailbag as fast as we can. We don't want to spend too much more time talking. And plus, you got other things to do, bro. You got to work and you got to do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, whatever.
You're all right. As long as you're good, we'll keep going.
I'm good.
All right. This first comment is from Brent Peterson, BP9121. Manny, in the pod twice now, you have said Miami has a better roster than FSU, but in the recent athletic ACC rankings or state rankings, you put FSU as the best team. What gives? Carlos was right. Do you understand my thinking now with FSU and Miami?
Well, all I heard was Carlos was right. Other than that, I didn't hear a single word. You said, listen, I get it again. The ultimate cop-out. You say they aren't as good in terms of talent on the roster, but Mike Norvell's a better coach, develops them better, picks up better guys in the transfer portal. And ultimately, that's what will overcome Miami, even though they will lose to Miami during the regular season.
Yeah. I think the issue for me with Mario is the taking care of business aspect. Florida State's proven they can take care of business, right? Like they went on the road at Pitt last year and didn't play well. They were injured, but they won the game. Those are the kind of games Miami has lost in the past. And like you just have to be able to overcome that. And I think Miami will for the most part in year 3, but I trust Mike Norvell's staff to be more consistent than I do Miami staff. Am I wrong?
No, but it's just interesting you have them losing to Miami. That's all I'm saying.
I think Miami will rise to the occasion to beat them this year in the regular season. Now, we'll see what happens in the rematch in the ACC championship game, but, we'll see.
We'll see.
Here's the question. Is it a failure if the Canes don't win the ACC or make the playoffs this season? This is from our buddy Andrew V_17. Is it a failure if Miami doesn't win the ACC or make the playoffs?
I mean, I think it's a failure if they don't get to the ACC title game. To me,
okay.
Based on the roster, based on the quarterback, based on how they've gone all in here in the spring transfer portal to fill the holes that they believe they had on the roster, holes that we said they had and they've addressed. To me, at that point, it's put up or shut up. They should at least be in the ACC title game because based on the breakdown you gave, they're either the most talented or the second most talented team in the entire league, and there's no reason they shouldn't be there. Now, not making the playoff, I mean, that could happen. That I understand. That wouldn't be a disappointment to me. I don't think it'll be a bad season if they don't make the playoff. But I think not making the ACC title game to me would be a disappointment.
I think the belief is that the top 2 teams in the ACC will make the playoff. I disagree. I think we've seen.
I agree with you. Yeah.
I think we've seen enough now, have we not? That the ACC doesn't get respect. Like, was that not the ultimate sign? And it's funny because I have this argument with Kelvin, our buddy Kelvin, all the time, and he's like, well, there's no way the ACC, and then Florida State got screwed last year, and I told him, like, dude, this was coming. Like, I don't understand why you didn't believe me. Like, this was coming. The SEC and Big Ten bias is very real, and even expanding to a 12-team playoff. If Miami, let me ask you this question this way, Carlos. If Miami has 2 losses, do you think they get into the playoff? If
No.
they win, if they lose the ACC championship but have 2 losses, do they get in?
I don't think so.
They have to win the league, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they get in without winning the league. I think if they had 2 losses and won the league, yes. But if they lose 2 games and don't win the league and finish second in the ACC, I think they don't get in. I think you're going to have at least 4 teams from the SEC and 4 teams from the Big Ten. I think you're going to have 8 teams from those two leagues combined.
Then
probably.
You have the group of 5 team, which takes up another spot. And then it becomes the Big 12 and the ACC for those other 3.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. That's basic. Like, let's just do the math. And I'm not saying the Big Ten and SEC are more deserving. I'm just saying that's the way it is. Like, look at the rankings. It's just the way it is. All right. This question is from Vic Vassal, Coach Vic4 on
And
Twitter.
I'll give you another thing. If
Yeah.
Miami loses to Florida to start the season, even if they finish with only 2 losses, I think that's going to look bad on them also because they lost to an SEC team.
Right. All these games between the ACC and SEC and the ACC and Big Ten, wherever
Magnified
they're
now.
played, all of them are huge. And
Yeah.
if I'm the ACC and I win those games or I have a winning record, like that has to be in every press release the whole season.
Yeah.
Like it has to be like over discussed. People used to make fun of me, Carlos, when I would say this. But when the SEC, when we used to hear SEC chants, you remember that? You'd hear them on the
Yeah.
broadcast, the fan bases from like this is the ploy of what the SEC and Big Ten were all about. They wanted to make the world believe that they were superior. And even if they're not, and last year the SEC was not superior to the ACC, it's still a core belief that's ingrained in everybody's mind. And so it leads to their conference getting preferential treatment over the ACC. It's a fact.
It's all about perception versus reality. And when the reality starts to become so widely different than the perception, then you need to be able to promote yourself and change that perception, right? Even if it's not maybe all the way true either. You got to be able to promote yourself and push it out there.
All right. Vic Vassal asked this question, Coach Vic4. Will the defense get 45 sacks this year, Carlos? Will Miami's defense get 45 sacks? For reference, Miami had 35 sacks last season. And if you're counting at home, there were only 6 teams that eclipsed the 45 sack mark last year. James Madison, UTSA, Florida State, SMU, Troy, and Penn State.
I mean, I think it'll get close. I think that's about 3.5 sacks a game. There's a shot. I'd say it's 50-50.
In 2022, there were only 3 teams that had 45 sacks. And in 2021, there were 4 teams. I'm going to say no. And I'm going to say no because most teams are going to know that Miami's strength is their pass rush. And I think teams are going to game plan to get the ball out of the hands of their quarterback quickly. I think we're going to see a lot of wide receiver screens. We're going to see a lot of slants. We're going to see a lot of quick releasing of the football. And I think the most important thing over sacks, Carlos, is pressures. How often can the pressure affect the play, lead to turnovers, lead to drops, lead to incompletions? That's what matters more to me than the physical, actual takedown of a quarterback.
Yeah, but I also think Miami faces a few teams that really are suspect on the offensive line this year, and they're going to be able to feast upon a couple teams to really improve and boost those numbers up.
Right.
You also play a few teams that have quarterbacks that like to scramble and move, and oftentimes that leads to sacks because the offensive line can't protect the quarterbacks running around there like a chicken with his head cut off, and it leads to an eventual sack.
Who is the breakout player on offense and defense this year? This is also from Coach Vic, Vic Vassal. Who are you picking as your breakout? And when I say breakout, I mean somebody who was not a starter or a big time contributor for this team last year on offense.
All right, so Cam Ward's going to be the obvious choice. We're going to eliminate Cam Ward, right? He's the quarterback.
Right.
We know he's going to have a good season. We should. Damian Martinez was, an all Pac-12 running back. I don't think we can select him because that wouldn't be surprising. We had a good season. Let's go with Isaiah Horton.
Okay.
I think he has a shot to, I think he has a shot to step in there and take that role on as a starting wide receiver and make plays and put up numbers.
Yeah, I think that's a good choice. The other one I was going to go with is Elijah Lofton because I was so impressed with him, the true freshman out of Las Vegas. Just a super talent, man. And I think they're going to find ways to utilize him, whether he's a running back, a tight end. He's going to get 5 to 10 touches, I think, once he's kind of ingratiated into the offense.
Probably not a tight end.
No, I think it'll be H-back, whatever role it is. But he will get 5 to 10 touches a game, and I think he's going to score some touchdowns, and I think he's going to kind of be the secret weapon in this offense.
Fingers crossed, because there's an allergy to the tight end in this offense.
On the defensive side of the ball, Carlos, who are you going with for breakout star?
Breakout star. You know what? I think it's kind of cliche to say Darrell Porter Jr., but I think he's going to be the best corner on the team. And I think he played well last year, and I think he's got another level that he can go to. I think he could be, second team All ACC, first team All ACC corner.
I'm gonna go with Damari Brown.
That was my other thought, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Damari Brown. And look, I heard a lot of positive things about Dione Hill, the Marshall transfer, when I went to Miami's Legends Camp over the weekend, and people were like, "Wow, he's a lot better than I thought he was," type of deal. Was what the way they were talking about him. Um, I'm not saying Downey Hill is like he's already a guy who was a starter last year at Marshall. But I think Damari Brown, because of his size, um, he is battling a groin injury that unfortunately has just been affecting him, and I think it's going to limit him. But I think when he's in there, he's going to make a lot of big plays, and I think he's going to sort of save himself for Saturdays most weeks, and he's going to be super effective for Miami. I think he is pivotal to this team winning the conference and having a chance to win the conference. And
Yeah,
so, um,
all three of those guys.
yeah, I think he's going to be sort of a breakout guy for him. All right, some random over-unders to give thoughts on. This is from our buddy Thomas, aka Winston Wolf, on
Ooh, the
Twitter.
Wolf. By the way, have you seen the trailer to this movie Wolves that's coming out with
I
George
have
Clooney and Brad Pitt?
I have not yet.
Oh man, it's like from you remember the wolf from Pulp Fiction?
Yes.
These two guys play a wolf that come in and resolve those sorts of problems, and they have no idea about one another. They each
Yes.
think they're the only dude that does this job, and then they have to come together to resolve some sort of issue. Fantastic. Watch the trailer.
I have to see it.
And
Now
I
you
saw
got,
Bad Boys 2 this past weekend, by the way. I mean, Bad Boys 3, my bad. Jesus,
was
or
was it
4.
was it
Bad
good?
Boys 4. I loved it. I love the Bad Boys series. I love the franchise. I think this one to me is my favorite Bad Boys was Bad Boys 2. This is right up there with Bad Boys 2 to me,
Okay. All
just
right.
behind it.
Okay. All right, these are the random over-unders. You ready?
Go ahead.
Isaiah Horton, 750 receiving yards.
I think it'll be slightly under.
I agree. I think he's under. Mark Fletcher, 750 rushing yards.
I'd say under due to the injury.
Yes.
And Damian Martinez.
Ruben Bain, 12 sacks.
Ooh, that's a lot. I'm gonna say under.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with 12 on the number. I think he hits it. So I'm gonna pick the over.
I go
There
10.
were 7 players last year who had 12 sacks or more at the FBS level. Only one at the Power 5 level last year. So, and then if you go back to 2022, only 2 guys had 12 or more sacks. So it's hard, but I think Ruben Bain's going to have enough around him to hit the mark. All right, JoJo Trader, the freshman receiver, 40 catches.
Under.
For sure under. Zaquan Patterson, the freshman safety, 50 tackles.
Under.
For sure under as well. I don't think he's going to be on the field that much. All right, here's a good one from Kane Finn. Are we doing a watch party anywhere for an away game this year, sponsored by MIA All Day Sportswear and Tax Solutions?
I would gladly sponsor one if everyone paid me $25.
That's the way you do it, Carlos, right there.
Hey, listen, if you guys want to get together for a road game, we could all hang out at the Garrison and we could do a like a live feed of the show.
In Miami Lake, sure, we can
Yeah.
do that. That'll be entertaining. All right, this is from Coach White. This one's a fun one. One Coach White, a guy who I message with privately every now and then. Can you give your projected ratings for some of UM's top football players on College Football 2025, the video game?
All right. I think Cam Ward is probably going to be the highest rated guy at like maybe say a 90.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably second would be Ruben Bain.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like 88 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think Damian Martinez will be like an 85. And yeah, I think Mesidor will be like an 85.
Well, what about Restrepo? Restrepo, I think, would be maybe
80,
87.
86, 87, yeah.
Yeah. They'll have guys. I think I'll put it to this way. I think Miami will have 10 to 12 guys in the 80 plus range. Probably one guy in the 90 plus range, whether it's Ruben Bain or Cam Ward, and the rest will all be beneath that.
Yep, I agree.
All right, this was an interesting question from Asher Wildman. Will Miami replace Alonzo Highsmith? And his position seemed like his role was a good one. He was active in it as well. Any updates there during the off season? Asher, I don't know. I haven't had a chance to talk to Mario. I went Sunday to the Legends Camp. He wasn't there. He was still dealing with recruits. I left at 12. I had some other things to do, so I was only there for a couple of hours talking to people on the staff and different people in attendance, former players, etc. So I don't have the answer for you, but ACC Media Days is next month, and I will be in Charlotte all 4 days. I'm going to be actually there for the whole thing to write about all the different teams in the ACC. So I will hopefully have an answer for you next month. But I think the answer is no. I think ultimately
Right.
that position for Alonzo Highsmith was
made for
created
him.
simply for him.
Yeah, I think because it was not only because he was a former Cane and such a respected guy from the community, but also because of his experience in player evaluation and talent
Yeah,
evaluation
yeah,
in the NFL. It's hard to find that mix to then play somebody else in that sort of role, to be a former Hurricane, to be an ambassador of the culture of the past, of what it was like to be a Hurricane, what it is, what it means to be a Hurricane, and have
yeah.
that player development side. I think if you're going to fill that role, to me, I would say maybe shift it a little bit and use it to your advantage, and maybe hire a retired head coach or a guy that's
Mhm.
no longer coaching anymore that maybe you could plug in there and offer you different ideas in terms of how to game plan, how to handle in-game situations, and also identify talent and recruit. Ed
Yeah.
Orgeron's floating around the program. Hide your kids, hide your wife, but he might be a good guy to step in there and have as an ear lending an ear to the program.
Oh, Carlos. All right. This one is from Marcus Williams, Money Kane on Twitter. Any players you think will have a Javon Nanton? How about that reference? Javon
Wow.
Nanton out of nowhere type breakout season and lead the team in a statistical category. I think the odds, if you were going to pick one statistical category that somebody could surprise and lead the team in, I think the easiest one would be like interceptions,
Yeah.
right? Like you could potentially have some defensive back who maybe doesn't start or play a ton, that somehow gets on the field and gets 4 picks to lead the team in interceptions. Like that's the kind of thing I could see happening.
Yeah.
So if I were to guess and throw a name here, I'm gonna come up with somebody that you probably. I'm gonna say Deani Hill. I'm gonna say the Marshall transfer. Not a guy that I'm sure most people have on their bingo card leading Miami in any
Or
category.
maybe Mish Powell.
Well, Mish Powell is a good player. He came over. He was productive at Washington, 3 INTs last year. So he's kind of a proven commodity. I think Diani Hill is kind of like, who's that guy? Oh yeah, where do we get him
Yeah.
from? I think he fits that bill a little better. Maybe a Jadis Richard somehow. He gets in the mix and leads the team in picks. I don't know. That would be a surprise to me.
Yeah. I agree with that.
All right. There's one more question that I'm not sure I even want to answer, but I saw it when I took a look at Twitter, and this is from Jaquan Cathy, Dapper Quan. He says, "Can you go into detail about the Nevin Shapiro situation back in the day? Your thoughts on him and why we do or don't want him back in the fold?" Carlos, do you want to handle that
Okay,
one?
well, number one, you don't want a convicted felon associated with your program. That's first and foremost. I don't think that benefits your program in any way. I don't think that's something you would sell very well to parents that you're trying to, that you're sitting in their living room recruiting their kids. Hey, by the way, one of our biggest boosters happens to be a convicted felon who ran a Ponzi scheme and defrauded people of hundreds of millions of dollars. But hey, he's a great guy. He's going to help your kid get some money. Don't worry about it. Second, I think the university blames him for a lot of the problems that it saw soon after that whole
Mhm.
scandal blew up. And they are not happy with the way that happened and the way it made them look as a university, because it made them look, first of all, incompetent, because Donna Shalala is there taking checks from a guy who's a known Ponzi schemer. So now you've got your president, the president of the university, actively interacting with a guy who's defrauding people of hundreds of millions of dollars and who's under an investigation by the SEC, and she has no clue. So it makes the university look stupid and clueless. So don't think that's going to happen.
All right. This was a I want to ask you your honest take. He said this is from Paul Linden, P Arthur 2 on Twitter. How many times will you mention FSU? The line sits at 18 and a half. Did I
I
hit
think
18 and a half for
I think you
FSU?
went over. I think you went over just during the whole top two conversation. I think you went over. I think the better question would have been, how many times did you mention Mike Norvell?
Yes. Yeah, maybe that's the case.
I think your
Maybe.
real thing is not you're an FSU fan. I think you're a Norvell fan. I think you got a little sweet tooth for the game.
It's hysterical how this works with you guys. But hey, I'll let you guys enjoy it. I'll let you guys enjoy it. Carlos, thanks for coming on, doing the podcast with me again. I know it's been a while. I know most of you, we had some people clamoring for more wide right. And you were right. There's really not a lot to talk about in the offseason. We kind of jumbled in a whole good long hour plus show to discuss a whole lot of topics. I think we'll come back with more stuff. We'll start breaking down maybe the ACC and the Hurricanes a little more in the weeks ahead as we get closer and closer to the season. But I hope this was a good overdraft for you. You got my top 17 in the ACC, every single team. That was a long conversation, Carlos.
Yeah.
I went through very detailed.
Listen, the second you said we're gonna go through 17 teams, I was like, holy shit. Okay, let's see if we can get through this.
Let's see if we can. Hopefully, I didn't bore you too much, but we
No,
talked about
it was
everything.
fine.
Hopefully, everybody has a little bit of knowledge about what happened with those teams in the league now, and we can talk about more fun stuff down the road. But thank you
Hey,
for
listen,
tuning in.
for those of you guys to prove to us you actually listen to the show, make sure you comment on YouTube, make sure you comment on Twitter, and give us some ideas for things you want to hear. Maybe some non-hurricanes related stuff. Do you want us to talk about, Bad Boys 4, Bad Boys Ride or Die if Manny goes to see the movie? Now we have a whole discussion about the movie on the show, or other topics that we could discuss in pop culture that are outside of the Hurricanes. Because as you know, Manny doesn't like talking about the Hurricanes. He just would prefer to talk about Mike Norvell.
That's right. It's my favorite coach. See you guys next week. Talk to you soon.
Peace.